Picking a cloud provider, it's one of the biggest, most complicated decisions any company has to make. It's a choice that really sets the foundation for everything you do, from your budget all the way to how fast you can innovate. So let's jump in and try to make some sense of it all.
All right, so let's look at the big players, the titans of the industry. First up, you've got AWS, the OG, the long-standing market leader, holding down almost a third of the entire market. Right behind them, you've got Microsoft's Azure, a super strong number two. Then there's Google Cloud Platform, or GCP, and a smaller but very scrappy player, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OCI. These four pretty much run the show. But here's the thing, right? Market share. It doesn't tell you the whole story, not even close. The real question, the one that actually matters, is which one of these giants has the specific strengths that line up with your needs, your apps, and, of course, your budget. That's exactly what we're going to figure out. So, here's our game plan. We're going to break this whole thing down, starting with the all-out price war. Then we'll look at the performance race and wrap up our analysis with the security fortress. And at the end, we'll pull it all together so you can make your choice. This is our roadmap. Okay, first up, let's talk about the one thing everyone feels right away: the cost, the money. This is where the whole conversation usually starts, and believe me, the differences between providers can be absolutely wild. So the most basic way to pay, and every single provider has this, is on-demand pricing. It's simple. You pay for what you use when you use it. It's awesome for spinning things up for development or for workloads that are super unpredictable. But that flexibility comes at a cost. It is the most expensive way to run things in the cloud long-term. Okay, so how do these prices actually stack up? For a pretty standard general-purpose machine, you can see AWS and Azure are basically identical, neck and neck. GCP is just a tiny bit more expensive. But then you look over at OCI. Wow. We're talking a massive 45% cheaper than the baseline. That is not a small difference. For just raw pay-as-you-go compute, that's huge. All right, but what if you know you're going to be running something for a long time? Well, that's where commitment pricing comes in. You basically promise the cloud provider you'll use their stuff for 1 or 3 years, and in return, they give you a gigantic discount. And I mean gigantic, up to 72% off those on-demand prices. This is how you really save money on your core apps. And this is where the plot thickens a little bit. When you look at a 1-year commitment, AWS actually jumps to the front of the pack with the biggest savings, just barely beating out GCP. So even though OCI crushed it on demand, you can see how AWS gets really competitive when you're willing to commit. But what if you're a real bargain hunter? You want the absolute rock-bottom cheapest price possible. Well, then you want to look at spot instances. This is you using the cloud provider's leftover spare capacity. The discounts are insane, up to 90% off. So what's the catch? The provider can take that machine away from you with almost no warning. Perfect for jobs that can be interrupted and restarted. Okay, now this is where it gets really, really interesting. The stability. Using AWS spot instances, man, it's like playing the stock market on a wild day. The prices change, on average, 197 times a month. Now compare that to GCP and Azure. They change less than once a month. That predictability is a game changer. It makes budgeting for these kinds of workloads way, way easier. Okay, so we've talked money. Let's shift gears and talk about our second pillar, performance. And let's be real, in today's world, that conversation is all about one thing: the crazy demands of AI and machine learning. Raw power and specialized gear is everything. And look, don't just take my word for it. The folks out there actually building this stuff, they have some strong opinions. As this one user on Reddit put it, when it comes to who's really pushing the envelope in ML and AI, it's GCP, and it's not even a close race. So what's behind that? Why does GCP get so much love in the AI space? Well, it boils down to a few really key advantages. Google makes its own custom chips, TPUs, designed from the ground up for AI. They let you build machine learning models right inside their data warehouse with simple SQL. And since they invented things like TensorFlow, the integration is just seamless. The whole ecosystem is just built for AI. But hold on, raw power, the fastest chip? That's not the whole story. Sometimes making a smarter choice about the underlying architecture can give you a way better bang for your buck and totally change your cost equation. And that big choice, more and more, is between the classic x86 architecture and the super efficient ARM architecture. For a lot of workloads, ARM just gives you better price performance, and the savings can be huge.
On Azure, for example, an ARM-based Spot VM can be up to 69% cheaper. That's not just an optimization. That is a total game changer for your budget. All right, we've covered cost, we've covered performance. Now for our final pillar. And honestly, you could argue it's the most important one of all, security. Because what's the point of cheap and fast if your stuff isn't safe?
You know, a solid cloud security strategy has a lot of moving parts. We're talking everything from securing the network perimeter to managing who has access to what, to making sure your configurations are correct, and, of course, protecting the data itself. Every single provider has to have a good story for all of these. But how they deliver on that security, well, that's where you see a tale of two very different philosophies. You have the established players who've kind of added security services over time, like bolting on armor. And then you have newer players who got to build security in from the very beginning. And this table really lays it all out. On one side, with AWS, Azure, and GCP, a lot of the advanced security tools are separate services. They often cost extra money, and you have to manually set them up. OCI's approach is different. Their tools are built in, included at no extra cost, and can be automated and even mandatory. The whole goal is to take human error out of the equation, because that's where most breaches come from. Okay. So, we've talked price, we've talked performance, we've talked security. Let's put all the pieces together. How in the world do you actually make a decision? It really just boils down to this. What's your number one priority? If it's the absolute lowest on-demand cost, OCI is your answer. If you're building state-of-the-art AI, you've got to look at GCP's ecosystem. If your company runs on Microsoft, Azure's integration is tough to beat. If you just want the biggest toolbox with the most services, that's still AWS. And if you want security to be on by default, no questions asked, OCI's philosophy is really compelling. So the big takeaway here, there's no magic answer. There is no single best cloud out there. The right answer for you is a strategic choice, and it depends completely on what matters most to you and what you're trying to build. And that kind of leads to one last really interesting idea. Maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Maybe the goal isn't to find that one perfect provider that does everything. What if the smartest play is to ask, which cloud should I combine? Think about it. Use GCP for its amazing AI tools, run your steady workloads on OCI to save money, and tap into AWS for some niche service you need. The future might not be about picking one winner, but about building your own all-star team from the best of all of them. Something to think about, right?